Now, I was hoping to see this young woman in person this week. However, she was unable to come to Winnipeg in spite of it being a very special day. In fact, today, Giselle Roeder joins us from Nanaimo, British Columbia. And Giselle, why is it such a special day today?
Oh, because 50 years today, I had a very hard day. But the best thing that ever happened in my life happened that day. I drove myself to the hospital and gave birth after 25 hours to a 7.8 pound baby. And this boy, Eric, lives in Winnipeg, and I really wanted to be there and say happy birthday and give him a big hug.
Well, we'll send Eric.
Now we can do that through cyberspace.
Absolutely. We'll do it right here on air, 680 CJOB. Happy birthday to Eric, the big 5-0. It's a monumental number and a very important birthday. We've had Giselle on the air before.
In March.
I'm sorry, Giselle?
It was in March.
It was, yeah. Geez, is that all?
Yeah.
It was,
yeah.
And it was. It does. It was great to meet you then. The book is We Don't Talk About That, an amazing story of survival. And Giselle, you are, for perspective, you are that Giselle that people will know in Winnipeg, correct?
Oh yes, right. I founded Giselle's Professional Skincare, which after I sold it, when I had 2 shops with 18 employees, I sold it to one of my customers, and she built it up to 5 stores, plus an aesthetic school, but in 2008 lost it all because she worked with bank money, which I never did. And you know what happened in during those years, it was very tough to have people spending money for unnecessary things in their life, so the shops didn't do too well, and they went under. And there's only one now, and that is the last of the Giselle shops in St. Vital, and I think they call it now Giselle's Whole Touch One Great Spa Wellness Center.
Well, Giselle, as we make our way through this discussion today, there's several different places I want to go, but can we try and relate what you went through? You came to Canada essentially as a refugee from East...
No, I didn't. I never considered myself a refugee. I immigrated because I wanted to immigrate, and I had married a German-Canadian in October and 63, and in December, 14th of December is practically my new birthday because I considered my immigration to Canada a new start in my life.
But you were forced from your home because of war.
Yeah, but that happened many years before.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that you can relate to.
It's an interesting story because it was the Russian invasion, massive Russian invasion in 1945 in February. At the 2nd of February, they came to our village. And in May, we didn't really know what date it was because we had no newspapers, radio, or any other way, no calendars. So we just went by nature and said it must be May because the cherry trees are starting to bloom. And then the Polish army came and they threw us out. We had 10 minutes to get out of the house. And so you can imagine that nobody thought of taking any papers like passports or birth certificates or anything. We just flew through the house and grabbed some clothing and some blankets, and 10 minutes later we had to be out because my mom wanted to go back and get a cookpot, and the soldier in the house door just threw her down the stairs, and all she did was kept calling out, don't cry, he's going to shoot you, because that's what they did. And so we walked away, hundreds of thousands, I think there were 3 million people on the road next to the Russians, to the Russian war machinery towards Berlin, which had already declared, the war had already been declared over on the 8th of May, but we had no idea. We didn't know that. And we were just walking, and later we found out that we must have been on the road for about 3 weeks. sleeping under the stars and on streets, under overhangs, in the forest when it was good, and arrived on the island of Rügen, which later became part of the East German sector, because Germany was carved up into 4 parts: the Russian, the French, the English, and the American sectors. And Berlin in the middle was like an island, because every one of the forces wanted part of it. And so again, this city, with about 10 million people, was carved up into 4 sectors. And a year later, there was the blockade, because the Russians wanted all of it, and the Allied forces didn't want to give it up, and the Germans who lived in the west sectors, who had a much better life, didn't want to give it up either. So there was the American flights every few minutes landing with fuel and water and food and everything the Berliners needed in the west part of it to survive for almost a whole year, I think 11 months, because they did not want to give up and become part Berlin become part of East Germany, because it was in the middle of it.
I think a lot of people, when they look back on history, are surprised to learn about Berlin and how it's surrounded by East Germany. And as you mentioned, a great analogy.
It was an island.
It was an island. And was there a road that connected Berlin to West Germany when all was said and done, where you could travel between West Berlin and West Germany?
For the first couple of years, yes. But in 1948, the Russians gave order to the young boys who had grown up, who were maybe our school comrades or friends or cousins or something, and they became part of the East German, what they called police, but it was actually the start of the East German army. And it was just like in 1935-36, when all the unemployed young men ran and followed the call of the Nazis to become soldiers, because they had no work. And in East Germany it was the same. So all these young men, they just flocked to become part of the police. At least they had a job and they got something to wear, because you couldn't buy anything. I, for instance, when I was 15, I made myself a dress out of a Hitler flag. You wouldn't believe it. A neighbor had that in her attic, in a trunk. Her family and ours would probably have been shocked if people would have found out what that red dress that I wore was made out of a Hitler flag. So the body of the dress was red, and the swastika I had taken all apart. It was kind of a band around the neck, and a black belt, and the skirt, the swinging skirt, and the white from the center of that flag became an insert, so that dress looked like a Bavarian country dress. And I wore that dress because it was the only one I had. Later, my third sister wore it. What happened after that, I don't know. But in East Germany, you couldn't buy anything. And when in 1948, the West Germany became, under Adenauer, a republic, and they started, make it a new country, the Russians didn't like that very much. And so they followed up a few months later, founding the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, and we happened to live there after that 3-week march through on the road to nowhere. Some people got to the west who had relatives there, but we didn't. So we ended up in the east. So my first 10 years after the Nazis were finished was in East Germany. And I tell you, and you listeners, that it wasn't very much different than under the Nazis. We had to shut up. We couldn't say what we thought. Whoever was not joining the party could not become anything or didn't even get a job, but everybody had a job. even if you didn't have any paint or nails or screws or whatever to do your job, at least you had to turn up and play cards and whatever. So they advertised that nobody in East Germany was unemployed.
Giselle Roeder joins us. The book is We Don't Talk About That. And some harrowing and horrifying experiences, to be sure, within the book. And you've shared some of those in the past. But I was hoping, Giselle, that you could try and tie your experience of being on the road, literally walking as you did for 3 weeks, as you mentioned, trying to find freedom, trying to find a place where you could be safe, sleeping under the stars, doing whatever was necessary to get to where you needed to be, to the folks that are trying to get to Europe now from places like Syria. When you see those images on the television, you can relate to that like not too many people, I imagine.
I can relate to that. I really can, because I know what it's like. The first time I saw those people, and they were, I think, the real refugees, the real people who left out of their own free will. See, when we did not leave out of our own free will. We wanted to stay where we were, but they threw us out. We were evicted. The whole country, 1/3 of Germany, was evicted, and that part became the very eastern part Russian, and then the rest of it became Polish, and it still is. So it was a movement of Germans to Germany, to another part of Germany. Now with the Syrians and the other people who are trying to get to Europe to start a new life, they are leaving their country and everything else behind. It's not just moving within their own country like we did. They are really running away from something, but unfortunately there are always people who go for economic reasons, and those were the first ones that came. And I have relatives in Germany, and I hear things that are not in the newspapers, because it's again a case of we don't talk about that. And I kind of wonder, I feel with those people, because when you see the old women and the babies and the children, and it is just absolutely heartbreaking. But where are they going to go? There are so many, and it's really, I don't see an end to it. I don't know. It would be wonderful if they could get their country back, but how would that ever happen? It couldn't.
So here we are.
Here we are.
Thousands, if not eventually millions.
I mean, Germany alone has by now over 800,000, and more are coming because they had this open door and open borders. And some countries now, with the French happening, they are closing their borders, and they are trying to keep people out, and because they don't know who is mixed in with them. And I think that is the big angst that people develop.
Is this something, this consternation about who's amongst us that took place when East Germany and West Germany reunified, when people were fleeing East Germany for West Germany? Have we seen this in history before, I guess is what I'm trying to ask you.
Yeah, the migration, the Germans to Germany first, the eviction, and then people ending up at the wrong place and living under a more suppressive government than we lived under the Nazis, because we lived in a small village. We didn't get much of it. We heard from radio and newspapers, and lots of people were listening to BBC in the evenings, but they had to really be careful not to be caught. And so that was bad enough, and the Nazis would pick up people, and you don't know where they ever ended up. And it wasn't just the Jews that ended up in concentration camps. Everybody who just said the wrong words, or there were informers. And in East Germany later, it was the same thing, but worse. And it happened, for instance, that my second sister came to West Germany with a visa to visit a friend, and she got a telegram that she is supposed to come home right away because her younger sister had died, and she had no idea, and she couldn't go home because she had given up her East German passport and was waiting for a West German one because she didn't want to go back. And then she got a letter again explaining that she has to come back. And then my father, during that time, turned 65, and at 65 you could go to West Germany with a visa, because if you didn't come back, well, they wouldn't have to pay you a pension, right? And that was in the 50s, like 56. And my father came, and my sister wore dark clothing and a black band around her arm, and he said, who died? What's going on? And she started crying, saying, yeah, well, it's because of Edie's, our youngest daughter, drowning. And he said, drowning? When did she drown? I saw her this morning. She was perfectly fine.
It was all a ruse to get her to come back.
A man who was a Stasi, as we called them, and he was an informer. He lived above our suite in the attic, and he tried to get her back, and she would have ended up in prison. Because that's what happened to people who escaped.
Giselle, fascinating stories. The book is beyond fascinating. It's called We Don't Talk About That, Giselle Roeder. Thank you for your time, Giselle. We'll do this again, I promise.
Yeah, can I mention that people who would like to buy the book, and with Christmas coming, it's a fantastic gift. Chapters, Polo Park, Chapters St. Vital, and Giselle's in St. Vital, they all have the book. And it would probably be a good idea if people would ask their libraries if they can borrow the book, because the more people ask for it in the libraries, the more likely that they will carry it.
Giselle, thank you so much for that. Thank you for your story. Harrowing and delivered in just a wonderful fashion. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Giselle Roeder joining us here on 680 CJOB.